Well, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Wellness by Design. I'm Jane Hogan, the wellness engineer, and I'm super excited about my guest today because this is Dr. Aimie Apigian. I don't know who first came up with the expression, the issues are in the tissues, but it is so true. We hold
Mm.
trauma in our physical biology. It comes out as pain, inflammation, and other things. And Dr. Aimie is an expert in this. And I know this subject is dear to my heart and a lot of people in my audience. So I really appreciate you being here today, Dr. Aimie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jane. It's always good to see you. Always good to see you. And I love the work that you are doing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just going to read your bio.
Okay.
Dr. Aimie is a board certified. I have to look away while I read it because I didn't memorize it. Board certified preventative and addiction medicine physician with a double master's in biochemistry and public health. She specializes in trauma, attachment, and identifying and reversing the effects of stored emotions in the body and on our health. Having personal experience in foster parenting, adopting, and then her own chronic fatigue and autoimmune issues, she has discovered that negative life experiences become our biology, not just our psychology. So true. Compromising every system in our biology, these stored emotions cause inflammation, digestive issues, and contributes to all diseases and aging. Stored emotions become the biggest thief to our health, happiness, and aliveness without us ever knowing. So true, Dr. Aimie. And, a lot of people don't even really realize this or make the connection. And I was probably a couple of years into my own healing journey before I did as well. But now I realize it's everything.
Mhm.
So, you mentioned there, I read out in your bio that you have some you had some history as well with autoimmune and chronic fatigue, which
Mhm.
probably took you down this road. So let's hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, and this is exactly what happened to me. I was one who would never have thought that I had trauma, stored emotions. No, never would have even recognized or thought that that was me. And then what happened is that I'm, busy doing life and pushing myself really hard. And I'm in a general surgery residency even, and I crash, Jane. And I mean, I
Mm.
crash, right? Like I had gone from always being very active, running marathons and being on my bike to I could not get out of bed. They would call me from the hospital during the night on call, and I would fall asleep before I could return the call. It was bad. It was way different than what I had up until that point. And yet when I look back, it's like, well, I understand now everything that I know now. I know that this was building. I know that this was accumulating for years before it finally surfaced at this level. But I was unaware and was very much not connected to my body the way that I understand that connection to our body can happen now. And so I was pushing myself. I would, had adapted over the years to life, and we all can adapt and have some coping mechanisms. And so, exercising had always been a coping mechanism for me. And then when I broke my collarbone, that got taken away for several months, and I felt like I was losing my mind. And then food became more of a coping mechanism for me. And then finally, when all of this happened, and I was laid flat. It was like, all right, am I ready to really face the issues and look at what's going on and not just try to slap a Band-Aid on it um,
Mm,
to to get back? Let's really look at things.
mm. I think a lot of us slap band-aids on as we go through life, and
Yes.
but we don't even realize we're slapping
You know,
band-aids on.
right.
And as you said, I had no idea all of this was accumulating, but I see it
Right.
now, that bucket filling and
Yes.
filling and filling and filling, and
Yep.
finally, there's a tipping point
Yes.
that, we gotta deal with it or else. And
Right.
but I think actually, in some ways, for me, I feel like it was a gift because I
Yes.
probably would have kept on putting Band-Aids
Exactly.
on if I
Yes.
didn't have that tipping point, and it sounds like the same for you too, right?
Yes, unfortunately, right? Like that's what it took for me to learn this stuff and to now have a much better life than I had ever had before.
Mhm.
My goal now is to help people not have to have that rock bottom that I had, right? Let's not have the health crash that I had. If they can learn from my lessons, all the better.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we're sisters saying the same.
Yes, we are sisters.
So I know that there's a lot of connection between well, and first of all, before we even get to that, I want to talk about the word trauma because
Yes,
you know, it's
yes,
a very loaded word, and so
yes,
most people are going around thinking, "Well, I don't have trauma," but
right.
it can be very mild things, really
Yep,
mild things like even maybe as a sensitive child, someone says
yep,
something and you take it a certain way.
right.
That can be traumatic in our body. So what
Yep.
do you say about this word trauma?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're starting here because this is again where I got hung up, right? Like trauma, no.
Mm,
I maybe would have identified with stress,
yeah.
probably a lot of stress that I'd brought on myself, right?
Mhm.
But trauma, no, not necessarily. And so now that I can look at the biology of trauma, and I have a whole summit on the biology of trauma and what that
Mm,
is, what that looks like. But when we look at the biology, it helps us define trauma.
yeah.
And trauma can then just be defined as something, anything that overwhelmed our system.
Ah, I love that.
Anything. Overwhelm. So that word overwhelm is the same word as trauma in the body. There is a specific biological state in our nervous system that is the overwhelm state. That is the trauma state. That is where, especially if we tend to be in a chronic overwhelm state where we're kind of going back and forth between overwhelmed and the collapse and the exhaustion, the burnout, and then stressed and got to meet the deadline and got to get all the to-do list done and got to push myself, going back and forth between stressed and then overwhelmed in that collapse. That is one of the classic biology of trauma patterns that I see.
Mm,
And this is it, like the biological state of overwhelm is where this stored trauma really happens in the
mm.
body.
I really like that because people can identify with overwhelm, but
Yeah,
sometimes trauma
right.
doesn't work.
Yep,
But overwhelm, I mean, we all go through experiences of
right.
overwhelm.
This
Some
is
of us
life.
can't even remember some of the overwhelm that we
Right.
had when we were little. So one of the things I was going to mention before we got into the trauma was the connection between early childhood trauma and
Mhm.
autoimmune disease.
Yes.
Huge connection, right? And it
Huge
doesn't
connection.
even have to be severe trauma. It can be just a mild, like hearing your parents arguing over money,
Right,
that
right.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, have you seen that connection in your work?
100%. And especially for the autoimmune stuff, there's I've never seen a case without this attachment piece associated with it. And
Mhm.
attachment is really the earliest of childhood experiences in that relationship dynamic.
Mhm.
And does your body have a felt sense of completely being known, being understood, being seen, and being safe and loved?
Ah, so good.
And that coming out of childhood, if that was your experience, then you have a secure attachment, and it is the biggest protective factor for all chronic diseases, and especially the autoimmune stuff. If you're coming out of childhood with an insecure attachment, and especially like you're saying, there's these family dynamics where it feels unsteady, it feels insecure. You don't know what mood they're in. You don't know exactly what you should be and what you should say and what you should do in order to keep the peace and make them happy.
Yeah.
That is overwhelming for a kid. They
Mhm.
don't have the system developed enough in order to be able to effectively handle that. And so looking back, we can say, oh, well, that was just how my family was, right?
Yeah.
But going through that as a kid, that would have been something that overwhelmed their system. And
Mhm.
again, laying in the footprints already of these trauma patterns, just simply because the family dynamics were unsteady enough to be overwhelming for a young child.
Yeah. Oh, I can see that. And as adults, we tend to brush it off because, like,
Right.
that was 40 years ago. Come on, get over
Exactly. Get over it.
but but it does get stored in our biology. So let's hear a little bit. I want to talk about your summit, so we'll save a little bit of time because it's such an important topic for people to hear. But before we get to that, what connections do you see with biology and emotions or trauma or overwhelm?
Yeah. So, one of the things that's important for people to understand is that this trauma pattern really leads to a number of imbalances, deficiencies, all kinds of stuff. Because
Mhm.
what happens is that the body is not only under chronic stress, but then also going into this overwhelmed state. And the overwhelmed state, it's interesting. Your audience may know this because I know they're very well read and you teach them well. But the overwhelmed state is really driven by the vagus nerve. And
Yes.
the vagus nerve starts in the brainstem, comes through the neck, actually goes behind the esophagus, and then goes into the stomach where it branches out and goes to all the digestive system, and then has very tips in the pelvis. And that's it. And when the system is overwhelmed, that signals the vagus nerve. There's a back part of that nerve in the brainstem. It signals the back part of that nerve to then send a message to the rest of the body to shut down,
Yeah.
to conserve energy. And so, one of the things that happens in this biology of trauma is that a body, the biology, the physiology, is going back and forth between really high energy state, which is highly stressed. You've got adrenaline pumping, you've got cortisol, you've got this high energy output. And then in a moment when it feels like it's had too much, or someone looks at you the wrong way, or someone criticizes you, and that's just been too much given everything that you're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
Then it shifts into this immediate shift into this very low energy state where your body, your physiology, down to the cellular level is saying, whoa, 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 shut everything down, slow everything down. The way that we're going to survive this is just to not care about anything because we don't have the energy to care. And everything that we're going to do, we're just going to do at the bare minimum because we don't want to be wasting energy on anything that we don't have energy for. So everything goes into this low energy state, energy conservation state. And we can see those effects on our digestive system.
Yeah.
We can see those effects on our hormones. We
Yeah.
can see those effects then over time in developing an autoimmune condition.
Yeah.
So this is what starts to happen. And then there's usually some nutrient deficiencies as well, both because of the high stress output periods, but then also because of these low energy overwhelm periods. And magnesium would be one thing, right? Like magnesium, sometimes even there's mitochondrial toxins. And so the NAD and these other mitochondrial factors can be depleted. All of these things can really then contribute to this vicious cycle of becoming more and more overwhelmed all the time because now your system is compromised too.
And when the digestive system isn't working as well, you're not absorbing
No,
as well,
no.
and then you can get problems with the lining, and
Yep.
then on and on it goes, right?
Yes.
It's just
Yes.
it's amazing it's amazing the connection in our body.
Yeah.
It's amazing how our body can respond to trauma, stress,
Yeah.
overwhelm, but it's also amazing how it can heal as well. And
Yes.
I know, we're not here to just talk about this happens and it's all bad. We also want to help people heal.
Yes.
So we're like, how do you even start with this, Aimie, with the people you work with?
Well, you're the wellness engineer, right? And
Yeah.
so you talk about how we can engineer the biology, and this is exactly what we can do with the nervous system. So, understanding, having the basic knowledge and understanding of how overwhelm gets into our system, the patterns that it causes, this biological state of overwhelm. Now we've got some leverage points that we've identified that we can go in and we can access in the system and say, hey, if I change this, how does the system as a whole change? How can I bring more energy into the system in order to be able to help it not feel like it's so energy depleted and keeps going into this overwhelmed state as often? And so then we start finding these leverage points in the biology that will help the nervous system not only come out of the freeze, come out of that overwhelm, but then come into a parasympathetic state. And the parasympathetic state is where we are going to naturally, without even having to think about it, be at our best physical health, mental, and emotional health. We are our best selves in the parasympathetic state. And so what we want to do is we want to rewire our nervous system in these patterns for now being consistently staying in that parasympathetic. And what we need to do is we need to rewire the system, and that takes energy. And so even the process of doing any kind of emotional work or rewiring the nervous system and dealing with some of these stored traumas, it takes energy. And so we've got to find these leverage points in our biology, find these compromises, and then start to open things up, start to bring some life into these areas that have been overwhelmed and have shut down and have been wanting to hide. We bring life to those areas, teaching them, redirecting them consistently to that parasympathetic state. And then we can do things that will enhance the neuroplasticity, right? And helping the nervous system actually be able to change more rapidly. And that allows us to even accelerate this healing journey because of being able to reverse engineer how trauma got stored into the nervous system in the first place.
I really love that approach that you took, like almost like being an observer, right? Okay, what are these leverage points? Like it's almost mechanistic, even though we're not just mechanistic, but seeing, okay, what are these things I can do? And it's a lot that people can do themselves, which is so actually, I mean, people have to do the work themselves, right? If you really want to truly heal. So finding these leverage points. And what are some of the typical leverage points that you use?
Yep. So one of the first things that I often start with is something that's called somatic experiencing.
Yes. I took your course and I really loved the somatic experiencing.
Somatic. Yep. Somatic is just the Latin word for body, right?
Yeah.
And why would I start there, right? Like here I am talking about mitochondria, I'm talking about energy, I'm talking about nutrients, and I'm going to start with some movements. I'm going to start with some exercises. Why would I do that? Because we need to be able to stabilize the system first before we're going to start making changes. Many people, myself included, I think when it comes to trauma recovery, I have made every mistake possible. So I'm here to teach people, right? Learn from my lessons. And one of the many common mistakes that people make is that they do too much too fast when it comes to emotional work, personal growth, trauma recovery. They do too much too fast. They kind of are building themselves up for it, right? Like, okay, I can do this. I'm ready for this. And then they go big and they go do something big because they've piped themselves up for it. But what happens is that when we do these big things, especially when it comes to these very old patterns that have been designed to keep us alive, it is too much for that system. And it actually puts it back into that overwhelmed state. Right. So we've got to create the container first for us to be able to do this work so that we know our boundaries, we know our system and how much we can stress it and have it be a good stress that will give us good results rather than being too much stress that will overwhelm it. And we're back in the same pattern that we've been always. So I always start with these somatic exercises that are exercises that work directly with your nervous system in order to help a person learn how to track, know which state of the nervous system they're in, and then Jane be able to shift their own nervous system. We talked about giving them tools that they can do for themselves. This is a big goal of mine, being able to teach them how do you track, how do you know which state you're in, and then how do you move that yourself so that you can be consistently redirecting that. And that's key for doing any of this work is the consistency, right? If you go down and see a therapist once a week, that's not really the consistency that your system needs in order to rewire. It's got to be something all the time, not only just once daily, but several times a day. You're noticing, ooh, I'm going back into that overwhelm place. Let me do a 2-minute exercise. Let me do a 2-minute movement here that I've learned that helps break out of that overwhelm and come back into parasympathetic. And so we're constantly redirecting our nervous system into this. No, this is our new place to be. This is our new place to live from. And then once we're there, then we bring in all of this other stuff. We bring in the mitochondria. We bring in the energy piece. We may need to look at methylation. We may need to look at copper and zinc, and we may need to do some micronutrients. We may need to, well, we kind of always have had to look at the digestive system and food sensitivities, and what are the components now that are draining the energy, that are making them still more prone to experiencing stress and having a lower capacity for stress, that they're going into the overwhelm. It brings in all these different pieces, but we've got that center container now through which we can do all of this work and still have it feel manageable and not overwhelm us.
Oh, love, love, love those tools. I love that, noticing in your body, because I know for me, I never really noticed, oh, when I'm feeling a little nervous, I clench down in my upper belly. But I never noticed that before. But when you
Right.
start to notice, then there's
Mhm.
something you can do about it, do
Exactly.
the exercise. So you give people these
Yep.
great tools. I want to
Yep.
talk, I know you've got a busy day today, so I want to hop right into talk about your summit that you've got going
Wow.
on, the Biology of Trauma Summit. So
Mhm.
let's just hear a little bit about that, and I'll be sure to
Mhm.
share a link for people to sign up, because I know they're going to learn a whole lot more. We've just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg here.
This is the tip of the iceberg. So this is a summit that I've put together on all of these aspects of what is important to include if we're going to actually rewire some of this trauma. And even starting with like where we started today with the conversation, what is trauma?
Mm.
So have over 40 different people that I've interviewed, and I selected each one specifically because of the content that they would bring. And what were all the pieces that I needed? What were all the pieces that my son needed in order to really effectively rise above these past life experiences and no longer have them be driving our health, our decisions, our relationships, all of that. So I have most amazing speakers, and this has been a summit that integrates this trauma work, the emotional work, and medicine, and a lot of functional medicine. And so I have some people talking about attachment and trauma. I have Dr. Peter Levine from Somatic Experiencing talking about how does stored trauma get into the body? Like, where exactly is it in the body? And how does that happen? What's a normal healthy survival response? And what goes wrong that it gets stuck and stored in our body? I have speakers on parenting, so even attachment parenting, the effects on children, especially coming out of this pandemic, and some of the mental health trends that we're seeing, and what can parents do, and trauma-informed relationships, how those are different. How do we bring all of this work into our partners, our romantic relationships, so that we're not playing out old patterns in that, because we still have this biology. And then all of these biology things, even down to some of the biohacking things. So, a lot of people love intermittent fasting because of the benefits that it gives them. And yet, for some people, if their nervous system is not in the right place yet, if they've still got some of this stored trauma, intermittent fasting is going to push their body over the edge. So when do you know that you're ready for intermittent fasting? And when are you like, oh, I need to do some of this other work first? So many different pieces to the puzzle. Again, over 40 different expert interviews on this topic of the biology of trauma. What is it and what can we do about it?
Oh, such important work, and so much for people to learn and discover while they're
Mhm.
watching your experts on the summit. So I'll share the link with the summit. I've got
Awesome.
one last question. Actually, before I ask you this last question, where can people reach you, Dr. Aimie? What's your website?
So probably the best way to find me is just draimie.com.
Okay.
And I spell my name AIMIE. So it's www.draimie.com.
Okay, and I'll share that link just so people don't have to like try to write it out. Okay, one last question. So I ask all of my guests this question. What's one action someone could take today to improve their health? So if you could just like pick one thing people could do today, what would it be?
Oh my goodness, Jane, it is so hard to only pick one.
I know.
Um, so the one that I will share right now is something very simple that you may think is really silly, But when we're talking about the nervous system and how to create a felt sense of safety for the body,
Mhm.
what one thing people can do is they can do foot massages.
Ooh,
And I don't know how much people know about how many nerves there are in the feet, but the feet are full of nerves. There's this whole foot reflexology study,
oh, yeah.
right? And so if no matter where you are, right, you can always rub your own feet. Find those tender spots, pay some attention to them. They're tender for a reason. You may even find some places on your foot where you can push really hard and you'll actually get a deep spontaneous breath, because that's stimulating the bottom of your feet to feel grounded, to feel connected. And so the feet, pay more attention to your feet. And even if you want to go get, one of those foot reflexology sessions, that would be amazing. But there's so much that you can just do for yourself by, working directly with your nervous system through your feet.
That's fabulous. I teach gentle yoga and breath work in my wonderful
Yeah.
fine women's group, and I did one session just on the feet because
Yeah.
they are so important. But nobody else has said that before, so that is beautiful. I love it, and I'm a Pisces, so I'm all about feet.
There you
So that's fabulous, Aimie. I really appreciate that. I know the audience is going to appreciate it. Something simple they can do themselves, right? And thank you so much for being a guest on my show today, for the work that you're doing in the world. Such important work, and really helping people change their lives and become the beautiful people they came here to be and are meant to be. So thanks for being my guest, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Jane.
Bye.